Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fleet Complete transitioning from AOBRD to ELDS. It's now 1:30, and I'm mindful of timing for everybody, so I wanted to kick this off. Firstly, I want to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to join me today. We're going to talk about AOBRD to ELD transitioning. Just as an FYI, this is not a training program that is traditionally delivered by Fleet Complete and Big Road. This is more along the lines of a regulatory session. So I just want to raise your awareness about that. My name is Mark Mosio, and I'll be facilitating this webinar today. For those of you who are joining this webinar for the first time, I'm the Vice President of Safety, Compliance, and Regulatory Affairs for Fleet Complete. I'm a former DOT MTO inspector, and I've worked in several enforcement functions with the Carrier Sanctions and Investigations Office prior to moving into private industry. I have sat, or I currently sit on several federal, state, provincial, and local regulatory bodies. I was directly involved in the development and delivery of the ELD mandate in the United States. I also sat on the federal committee that helped draft the ELD mandate that is coming to Canada. I'm currently working with Transport Canada and the Canadian Trucking Alliance, and specifically the work is on third-party audit protocols for ELD in Canada. I am known as a media influencer with over 15,000 LinkedIn followers. I also manage an active discussion group on transportation safety professionals on LinkedIn as well. If you have not done so already, please feel free to reach out to me at both of these locations or on LinkedIn. I've also written or co-authored 3 books on the transportation of dangerous goods, hazardous materials in French and in English, as well as hours of service. I'm the principal author of the Ask the Expert blogs at Fleet Complete. I've written well over 100 blogs on different topics of interest in the industry. So if you have a free moment, you can go to the Fleet Complete Big Road site, click on the Ask the Expert button, and you can do searches on different topics. Likely, if you have some questions, I've already probably answered a number of them at the Ask the Expert site. So essentially, if it runs on a truck or a bus, I can likely help you as well. If you have a question, it doesn't have to be about ELD. You can ask me anything pertinent to a truck or a driver or regulations, etc. I also have a number of YouTube videos that are found at Mark's Safety Corner. My last YouTube was coincidentally about what a driver, fleet, and ELD should do when, if and when an ELD malfunctions. So you can find that on our website as well. Finally, I'm a fully licensed CDL holder. I used to drive truck for a living, and I can operate all types of commercial motor vehicles. So really enough about that. We'll just move on to some housekeeping before we kick it off. To begin, I'll be recording the webinar. Content will be found on our website. You'll see there's a number of recaps on different other webinars that I've hosted. This includes if and when rules are either being proposed or have been proclaimed, and any other real news about the industry. I post new content all the time on both sites, so it's a great source of information for you. If you want, during the course of this webinar, you can submit your questions to me. I do have a lot of information today, so I'll hopefully answer at the end at the QA session. If not, I will get these answers to you because this webinar is being recorded. You'll have some detailed answers, and we'll follow this up with an email to everybody that's registered for the session. So you can feel free to share this presentation once you get it with whomever wants to see this. In terms of our discussion points, I'll begin by introducing ELD as a concept and what does the device do specifically. We'll move about the two-year grandfathering provision, how that worked out, and I'll touch upon who must comply with the requirements. For those of you listening who think you may be exempt, maybe you are exempt, but you are still required to comply with the hours of service regulations, but the exemption would be perhaps just for the requirement to have an ELD. From there, I'll explain really just at a high level, because I've gone through this in detail in earlier presentations about the difference between AOBRD and ELD. Once we have a solid understanding of that, I can talk about, if you're a current Big Road customer, how you enable your ELD. It's a pretty straightforward process, over the air transmission. You don't need any new technology, any new hardware, so it's a fairly easy process. Then part 2, we'll talk about what you and your team can do, what you can expect in the new ELD world. And then after, I'll share some best practices with you in terms of what I've observed since ELD was launched in the US. My goal is to help you learn from the mistakes others have made. I'm sure you've heard the saying, a smart man learns from his mistakes. Well, a genius learns from the mistakes of other people. So with that in mind, you may want to consider implementing some or all of these best practices in your fleet to ensure a smooth transition of ELD for your drivers as well as your back office staff. I'll then conclude the webinar with a Q&A session. So let's get underway. We talk about ELD. FMCSA mandated it back in December 2015, and it was finalized in February 2016. There were two main grandfathering periods. These periods were used for a smooth transition from AOBRD to ELD. And as we all know, the point of origin was December 2017, and the full sunset for full enforcement is just around the corner, December 16th, 2019. While the first phase enjoyed what is commonly referred to as a soft launch, it's my opinion that there'll probably not be another soft approach to DLT after this mandate is passed. You can expect full enforcement of Part 395. It's also reasonable to expect that non-compliant drivers or motor carriers will face penalties, fines, and even some out-of-service conditions depending on the circumstances. If you weren't aware, according to the FMCSA safety management system, violation lists, a failure of a driver to record a duty status is deemed to be a critical violation under your CSA scores. What this means is significant penalties for both drivers, motor carriers, and also can up and to include drivers being placed out of service if you don't have a deployed ELD. And I thought, since I was getting a lot of questions at Ask the Expert, I thought we'd just revisit this with another webinar just shortly before the ELD mandate. Because there really, there's been a lot of misinformation, a lot of myths floating around ELD. It leads to a lot of confusion amongst company drivers, owner-operators, and fleets alike. Many motor carriers and their owner-operators are still unsure of the type of devices they should use, who they should partner with. So with the final mandate just around the corner, I just want to help you out and give you a greater appreciation of what you need to do to comply. My goal is to help you out to the best of my ability to make this as smooth and painless a journey. And when you think many fleets that transition when ELD was first introduced, a lot of them learned the hard way. Successful migration to full deployment of ELD requires careful planning and thoughtful implementation. So we'll talk about those things today. Essentially, the biggest thing as a takeaway I found was that fleets that waited till the last minute transition had some significant operational issues. It caused a lot of anxiety with their drivers. And this, translates into potential compliance issues at roadside, increased risks and downtime for drivers and fleets. Equally significant are the likely ELD transitions relating to hardware upgrades. If you haven't gotten this already, you should really get going because time is ticking here, particularly given, the different size of fleets that are out there. All these challenges can be mitigated with a solid plan of action. When I'm thinking back, many proactive fleets have consciously elected to get ahead of the December 16th deadline. Some have used this as an opportunity to upgrade their older systems, modernize their technology, improve their overall efficiency and compliance. With this deadline just around the corner, it's time for those of you that are subject to get underway. So I just want to now move on to what's deemed to be an ELD. Well, essentially an ELD is just technology that captures all movements of a commercial motor vehicle. It includes capturing of a driver's drive time using a self-certified device that is connected through the ECM of the vehicle. As you know, if you're hauling into Canada, you're going to see it's a third-party certification process, which is quite different than what was the case in the US. So the deployment allows easier, more accurate hours of service record keeping. The ELD monitors a number of parameters, includes but not limited to when the vehicle is running, whether the vehicle is moving, whether the miles are being driven, and the engine hours that are being captured. And really, manufacturers such as Fleet Complete, we self-certify our products. And if you look on the FMCSA's website, you'll see that we're a list of certified vendors under ELD. Moving on to implementation, as I mentioned earlier, the proclamation date, there was a grandfathering clause, and really it was done to allow carriers the flexibility of going under AOBRD or ELD for a 2-year window. People continuing with paper logs was, of course, simply not allowed going forward. Many of the carriers took advantage of AOBRD, and a lot of them that I talk to now, when you fast forward back from the past, don't want to go back to the paper logs. It's as simple as that. So really the next milestone would be a lot simpler than I think in the first phase, because you shouldn't have the real in-depth requirement to purchase new hardware, etc. So who must comply? This is a big question asked of me, and really there's 3 exceptions, but I also want to start off with the fact that for drivers that are not normally required to maintain logs, they're also exempt. This would be, as an example, short haul drivers. They don't need an ELD unless they run outside the short haul or 100 air mile radius rule, as it's known. So if you or drivers in your pool working for you go within a 100 air mile radius of your starting point, you don't normally need to keep paper logs, therefore you wouldn't require an ELD. This incidentally also applies to non-CDL drivers who have a 150 air mile radius of their starting location. You have to remember, though, that there's some specific requirements that you must comply with in order to continue to take advantage of this short haul. Specifically, your reporting location and when you're released of work must be within 12 hours. If you go over this time frame, you can no longer use this exemption, and you must comply, or you must complete a paper log. But in those instances, you still don't have to comply with ELD. For property carrying commercial motor vehicle drivers, you also have to take 10 consecutive hours off, separating each one of these 12 hours of on duty. So if you're not complying with that, then you have to defer back to paper logs. Next one, and this one here I get asked a lot as well, is the 8 and 30 rule. This is really for drivers who are required to keep records of duty status logs for no more than 8 in the 30-day window. Important to point out, this is not a calendar month. It could be between the 15th of June and the 15th of July, as an example. So what you want to do is make sure that you never go over the 8 and the 30-day window, because you always want to err on the side of caution. You've heard of Murphy's Law. Well, it goes something like this. If something can go wrong, it will, and usually at the worst possible time. In this case, think of you not having an ELD, and then you happen to go outside your 100 air mile radius rule for more than 8 days in that 30-day window. What Murphy's Law tells you is on that 9th day, without an ELD compliant device, you get stopped at roadside. You can, in these instances, and likely will be cited for a violation and even placed out of service. The next exemption, and this one is not as prevalent, though there are some fleets out there, and it's basically the drive-away, tow-away operations. That's essentially if the vehicle is driving is not part of the shipment, so it's empty and for sale, for lease, for repairs, as an example. In this case, you're not required to use an ELD. There's also the 3 pre-model year 2000 exemption. I don't know if you're aware of that one. So anyone driving a vehicle with a model year before 2000 will not need an ELD. In this case, you must continue to complete paper logs as you always did. And essentially why is because the technology and the connections aren't compatible with older engines. And FMCSA deemed this to be too difficult for such vehicles to comply. In order to confirm this exemption, you will need to look at the vehicle's engine year, as there's a date stamp on the manufacturer. You want to show this date stamp on the engine to the DOT inspector at roadside. What I've done is I've shared a bulletin from you, the CVSA bulletin. It's called the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. It's a bulletin that explains, like in those cases, as an example, you have a glider kit, and it's where you have an older engine that you put to a newer chassis. You could be exempt from the ELD rules by virtue of the engine year if it's pre-2000. The one thing I do want to stress to you, though, is that you still, under these exemptions, still must comply with the hours of service regulation. You may be exempt from ELD, but nothing has changed with ELD on that front. Drivers still must continue to prepare paper logs, but according to under Report 395. The other thing I've deemed is, these types of scenarios, DOT may provide you with much more attention because your ability to be creative with paper logs remains. At the end of the day, motor carriers must still maintain and have accurate records. Therefore, these drivers and motor carriers are still subject to compliance audits, and they still must have these records of duty status. Now, I mentioned about the differences between AOBRD and ELD. We've talked about this in an early webinar, so I'm not going to belabor that point here. What I want to do, though, is just move on about enabling ELD at Big Road. So basically you have, as an administrator, you're responsible if you're a big road customer, you'd have access to the HOS solution. It's a fairly simple solution. You begin by clicking on the fleet tab, and then you go to the ELD readiness report button. You can then switch between trucks, drivers, and fleets by simply clicking on the appropriate tab underneath the ELD readiness report. Trucks and drivers can then be filtered in the same way. When reviewing the report, you will be able to see which ELD vehicles you want to deploy as ELD and which ones you want to maintain exemptions. Now remember though, once you enable your ELD, there's no turning back. Now for those of you, if you're an ELD partner with Big Road and you have not enabled your ELD, you're going to start seeing these banners. This first one is a blue banner, and it's going to tell you that the ELD deadline is approaching. Drivers or safety meetings will see this message, and it's just really to remind the administrator that they need to switch a specific vehicle to ELD by the December 16th deadline. You also have the opportunity to prepare for the switch, and it explains to you how that happens. And you can also view the ELD readiness report. If you are not an administrator, you will not see anything beyond this. For ELD administrators, when you get on the solution at the beginning, you'll see the same blue banner, and it's notifying you that the deadline again is approaching and that you need to switch before December 16th. You'll have those same two links, how to prepare for the switch, how to view the report, and then you're going to be given three options. You can switch now, so that's switching your trucks. This will take you to the Big Road wizard that would walk you through switching from AOBRD to ELD. After completing and switching any other user, if you have multiple admin users with your account, you will get an email notification that the vehicles have been switched to ELD. This email will also include a link to documents that you require. The next button is "This does not apply to my fleet." This is really for fleets in Canada that don't have vehicles that travel to the US, or for fleets in the US that are currently exempt. You may be running a mixed fleet. You may be having some that are exempt, others that are not. So in this case, you could apply ELD to certain segments of your operation, but not the entire operation. And the third button is "I'm not ready yet." By clicking this "I'm not ready," you will dismiss the banner. If the date is before December 1st, this banner will reappear in 7 days. If the date is after December 1st, the banner will reappear each day until you, as the administrator, you either switch to ELD or you click the "This does not apply to my fleet" button. After the 1st of December, if you're a non-admin, you'll see a similar message, but the banner will now be in red. It's basically the same viewing of the ELD readiness report. In terms of the administrator, you will see a similar message, but again with the same three buttons. It's just alerting you that December 16th is just around the corner with the three options again. As you get past the deadline of December 16th, the non-admin will see, "Hey, by the way, just thought I'd let you know you're no longer compliant." As for the administrators, we'll see the button. You notice that you only have two buttons. The last button is no longer there. You only have the option of "Switch now" or "This does not apply to me." You don't have this "I'm not ready yet" feature. So really at the end of the day, my recommendation is, if you're partnering with Big Road Fleet Complete, you want to get this ELD enabled sooner than later, just so that your employees can get used to the new world. So I want to talk to you about what you can expect. First thing is the ELD driving statuses. The ELD mandate included several small but important changes that are significant for you all to understand. Keeping the following in mind when evaluating the right system and before you actually implement your plan. The one areas I really want to focus on are the key job functions when the vehicle is in motion, but the time is not to be counted as drive time. There are circumstances where a driver is not on a public highway or is relieved of responsibility by the motor carrier. The two most common instances are yard move and personal conveyance. Now, yard move, this is essentially the duty status selected when either a driver, a mechanic, another employee moves a truck within a limited access lot or a facility without having to proceed on a public highway. The duty status in this case is on duty, not driving. So even though the vehicle is in motion and the vehicle will record drive time, by selecting yard move, it won't default your driver to driving. I've also included a link to the yard move below, and it explains how that works. The second is personal conveyance. This duty status is selected when a driver is using the vehicle but is relieved of responsibility and can operate of their own time for personal use. The driver, as I stressed, cannot be performing any active on-duty staff or any task on behalf of the motor carrier or driving to their next destination to pick up or drop off a load. For your information, and again, it's on the Fleet Complete Big Road site, is a link to personal conveyance, and it explains how that works. As an FYI, motor carriers and their drivers that are operating in Canada as opposed to the United States, or vice versa, if you're a US carrier hauling loads into Canada, you have to be aware of the personal use privileges because they're different in each jurisdiction. You'd hope that they would be identical, but they are clearly not. And in this case, the United States has much more liberal personal conveyance rules than in Canada. So you want to make sure you're selecting the correct duty status on your devices before moving the vehicle, because if not, if the vehicle's in motion, it will then defer over to driving time. And then now you got to start annotating. Really want to say, using Big Road's ELD solution with its user-friendly interface, this will make this very easy for you. Next thing I want to talk about is log editing. With AOBRDs, as a motor carrier could make log edits on behalf of a driver without their knowledge or consent. Under ELD, it's just the opposite. Under ELD, the driver has the ultimate responsibility. The drivers can suggest the edits, but the driver has the final say. It's very important that I note to you that all edits must include an annotation in the remarks section. This is very important for your drivers. If they're going to edit their logs, they should protect themselves and annotate. You'll need to really train and work with your drivers on how the appropriateness of log editing should be used. Again, I have included a Big Road quick reference guide with a link for you. Next one is roadside inspections and facility audits. Inspections and roadside audits are changing. So with AOBRD, the driver could either display, print, or email the logs in a paper or electronic mail to the DOT. With ELD, it is a EROD process with the DOT in the United States. Rods can be electronically transferred to authorized safety personnel, or you can perform a local data transfer. In the case of Big Road, we offer the web service email system. You want to make sure your drivers know how to do this because they need to successfully navigate through an inspection. Failure to do so can and will be resulting in citations. So your drivers really need to know how to do that. There's some easy to use steps I wanted to explain. The driver is responsible for initiating the transfer. They must fill in a comment field that gets populated. It then gets sent in the form of a key phrase or code, which is used to link the data to the inspection. If the EROD fails or is not available, then the driver will be asked to print or display, or as a final, have the paper log for the day in question and last 7 days in the US. In the case of Canada, last day in question and previous 14. So if there's one thing you're going to leave with today, if anything, is to make sure your drivers always have a blank book of logs in their possession. There's also like an ELD checklist I just wanted to share with you. This is what the FMCSA is going to look at. They want to make sure the ELD is registered. And this will be done either by going on the website or by retrieving the data during the file transfer or confirming that the output file complies with the regs. The officer will want to verify that the device is integrally synchronized. This is just a quick and simple way to say that the device is actually physically connected to the vehicle and is capable of transmitting data. You want to ensure that the data and the device can display the rods for the day in question and the previous 7 days. The driver must also have an onboard packet. It's a very important information packet. This is the in-cab document. This is our big road document. The driver must always carry this ELD packet with them. They have to be able to demonstrate the use of the device. The ELD has to have the capability of printing or displaying as well. And in the case of a malfunction, you go back to the paper logs again. I've written a blog about this, the ELD card and malfunction guide, and you can find it at this link as well. The information packet is key, is very key. You know, it has a driver instruction card. It explains how the driver transfers the records. You need it for the day in question and the previous 7 days. I would suggest you put this in your permit book so that it's readily available for your drivers. In terms of ELD malfunctions, interestingly, there was a fairly significant malfunction. I wrote a blog about this as well, but you know, occasionally ELDs will malfunction. Drivers, you have to notify your motor carrier within 24 hours. Then the driver has to revert back to the paper logs. I know this could be a pain, but the driver must be able to recreate their logs. The driver must also annotate in the remarks confirming that they've gone back to paper logs. It's key for the carrier to work with the ELD vendor for the 8-day notice. And again, I wrote 2 blogs on that, and I just did actually a YouTube video about it too. So if you ever want to have a look at that, you can find that fairly easy. Just type in Mark Mosio, my name, and you'll find that out. Next one that's very key with ELD is unassigned time. As you know, ELD records all drive time, including when the vehicle is driven without a driver logged in. If the driver forgets to log in, the next time someone else logs in, they'll be asked to either accept or reject this unidentified driving time. Ultimately, a driver is responsible for assigning or unassigning their drive time. And the motor carrier, if you have a fair bit of unassigned driving time in this new ELD world, that's probably one of the first things the auditor is going to ask you about. So you want to protect yourself. You want to be able to instruct your drivers how to use this unassigned driving time and how to accept and reject, because a driver forgetting to log in and logging out is going to be a fairly common occurrence. You should consider posting reminders about this for drivers. You should have a plan for the extra time that will be managed. There's going to be an uptick in the number of these unidentified driving time. So it's key as a motor carrier that you assign your drive time, because this is where this is going to be key at Roadside, or more so a compliance audit. They're going to be looking at this unassigned driving time very closely. Going to move on now to some ELD transitional best practices. This is based on my observations going back 2 years. And again, I want to help you get a smooth transition from AOBRD to ELD. Essentially, we'll start off with strategic planning. You know, hands down, the biggest issue that caused problems with motor carriers is when a motor carrier waited till the last minute. You don't want to do that. So let's think about the W5 here. You want to know who are your main stakeholders. You want to know what changes are expected, when will the changes take place, where in the fleet will this impact, why has the fleet selected a specific ELD vendor. So there's a lot of key points that you really want to be attributing when you make your decision from a strategic perspective. In terms of hardware and software, you want to look at the types of devices. You know, on your systems, you want to know what's going to impact your workflows. You want to choose a best-in-class system that you can grow with. You want to confirm that the system has an easy-to-use interface. You want to be able to assess whether you have both hardware and software capabilities with your current operations. You know, that is really a key decision that has to be made. Once that decision has been made, you want to ensure that all your in-cab devices are delivered in a timely manner. And this is something I found the last time. I don't see it's going to be as crucial this time, but you got to give some lead time. You have to give some lead time for the equipment to be shipped. You want to make sure that it's installed properly. You know, you want to be able to, like with Big Road, we offer our own flexible bring your own devices. This allows your fleet to find mobile devices that works best for you, works best for your drivers. A lot of drivers have expressed big interest in tablets because, you know, a lot of truck drivers like the big screens. You know, when you're around my age, you want something that's easy to use. You want to decide if the drivers in your fleet want to use phones or tablets. As you know, the other thing, ELDs are required to be mounted on the dash. So you want to ensure that whatever device a driver uses, they have the appropriate mount. I've had a lot of questions about this. I've had some people reach out to me because they've been charged. Clearly, both the driver and the motor carrier can be charged if the device is not properly mounted while in transit. The next thing you want to consider is the current age of your AOBRD. As you know, technology, both on the hardware and the software side, evolves quickly. It's been 2 years, so you may want to confirm if your current system requires an upgrade. In the case of Big Road, it's a simple over-the-air upgrade, easy to do. You want to check for network suitability with your ELD, particularly if you're switching from one vendor to another. This is where it's going to become problematic. You want to make sure all of your settings on your solutions are ready to roll out. One key one I've seen a lot is you want to make sure that any vendor you align yourself with have the hours of service rule sets that are compliant in all jurisdictions that you operate. You have some vendors that simply have the federal rules with no state rules. Same thing up in Canada, you have the federal rules but no provincial rules. So you want to confirm that all of the rules are built in. You want to ensure that all of the HOS exemptions are there. You want to confirm that the optional statuses such as yard move and personal conveyance, adverse road, emergency conditions, that they're all defaulted. These are standard features with the Big Road solution. You want to also make sure that the system's set up, and you want to assign a username, unique password for your drivers. You want your fleets, if you're operating a lot of cross-functional departments, you want to make sure everybody's on side. You want to make a list of all the requirements from your back office perspective. You want to make sure this thing goes very, very smoothly. Next big piece I'm going to say is talking about communications plans. I can't emphasize enough. You got to get all of the stakeholders on side. You want to be able to highlight. You want to be able to use clear and simple language with your staff. You want to make sure you want to take advantage of the opportunities and the benefits of ELD. In a day-to-day business, there are many things you need to worry about, but you want to make sure you're on side. You want to leverage this announcement to remind staff about the end goal to keep everybody focused. The bottom line is that ELD was rolled out with the goal of ultimately improving safety. There's a lot of key benefits: saving time and money, reducing admin costs, increasing fleet efficiency, providing real-time access to information, minimizing compliance violations, helping to improve CSA scores. I can just go on and on with all these benefits. You want to update your company policies. This is very, very key. You want to have some ELD monitoring policies. You're likely going to run into some situations where drivers may exceed their maximum driver on duty time. This could very well happen. You want to remember that the ELD will trigger alerts and violations at times. You want to make sure drivers understand, the half an hour rest before the 8th hour, because the ELD will not allow you to edit any drive time. If your driver's taking the half-hour rest before the 7th hour, that's okay. But if a driver is going to take half an hour rest at 8 hours and 3 minutes, it will result in a violation. Clear, as simple as that. I've seen a lot of violations where drivers go over this rule thinking they have some leeway. There is no leeway. So it all comes down to planning the routes from the outset, using all of the exceptions, using adverse road conditions, giving yourself the flexibility. Next one is real keys with load dispatching. Dispatchers have to get up to speed with this new ELD world. They want to make sure drivers are not given loads that will enable them to violate the rules. You want your dispatchers to have an open line of communication with your customers. They got to agree on some reasonable expectations for delivery times and the dates going forward. As you know, drivers have traditionally been very creative to get the loads delivered when needed, but this world has changed. You need some policy updates in terms of editing logs. Drivers will occasionally make mistakes while using ELD. As supervisors, you have to be aware of when and how to coach drivers. The new rules accommodate this reality and allows both drivers and carriers to make edits. You should update your policies to be clear in those instances where edits are able to be done. You want to have some specific reference to personal conveyance. You want to understand in which circumstances can personal conveyance be used. In this case, you can use the guidance from FMCSA, or you could download my personal conveyance blog. The same thing with yard moves. In some cases, some companies have allowed yard moves to be managed, whereas others, they found that there's been some abuse. So you want to have some strict policies with respect to these two types of moves that you're allowed to grant as a privilege for your drivers. Next policy update should be for unassigned driving. This is a new concept with ELD. As you know, ELD captures truck movement even when someone's not logged in. Unassigned driving events must be reviewed by the driver. You need to sit down with them and you need to understand what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, because there's an opportunity for using unassigned driving time to go over on your hours. And I can tell you, as a former inspector auditor, that's probably the first thing they're going to be looking at if they ever show up at your door. So you want to have a clear policy for this. You want to have some policies with respect to ELD malfunctions. They will happen, as I mentioned. Again, I have a blog and a YouTube here that speaks to that. Next one is driver anti-harassment provisions. Built right into the regulation is harassment provisions. You can't coerce, intimidate, force your drivers to accept any hours that don't belong to them. So you should have a written policy that all staff understand this new harassment rule and what could be the consequences. I've personally have had drivers reach out to me. Some of them are being coerced into violating the rules. Their trepidation and their concern because the ELD is telling the true story. My consistent reply is, you want to use, there's a whistleblower link that drivers can use, and they have started using it. Same thing with disciplinary policies and coaching. In the old world, paper logs were up to 15-minute increments. With this new ELD, it's right up to the minute. So, which means 10 hours and 38 minutes is 10 hours and 38 minutes, and it's being reflected just like that. I personally have come across multiple occasions where drivers did not adequately manage their time or know when to stop, and they're getting closer to their maximum limits. This is very key, finding safe locations for them to stop. Your ELD vendors should have alerts built into their solution to highlight when drivers are getting close to their maximum hours. This is particularly the case with the 8-hour limit for the 30-minute break. Similar scenario for drivers not taking their 10 hours of rest. The US government has put forward some plans for amending the rules, but up until this is actually proclaimed, you have to stay within what is prescribed by regulation now. So you should have your policies updated accordingly. You want to reinforce these policies with coaching. It's a real valuable tool. It reduces your fleet costs, it can increase productivity, it improves driver safety, and it's effective for supporting ELD compliance. Doing things such as leveraging a scorecard. We have developed here at Big Road Fleet Complete. It's a scorecard that provides an objective measurement of how a driver is performing. Can serve the basis of your coaching program. It allows you to see individual driver results, comparing them with your overall fleet. And in Big Road, we have this solution. We have driving violations that can be included in the scorecard. The one thing that's key is once you've identified where help is needed, like you want to really showcase your safest drivers and reward them. We talk a lot about the stick. Let's talk a little bit about the carrot. Let's reward drivers. In those cases where drivers are going over their hours, mistakes happen. This is a new world now. Drivers will make some mistakes. DOT, a former inspector like me, I know mistakes happen. It's really letting the driver know what the violation was, what they did wrong. You want to train the drivers on how to comply with the rules. Give some clear instruction on the consequences. You want to reinforce with some policies and procedures. I'd have things like have a driver fill out a form with an HR. It just confirms they understand what they've done wrong. The golden rule is, have you taken reasonable care and attention to bring this matter to the attention of your drivers? Have you offered some coaching and training? Have you documented these proceedings? Having some performance bonuses. I talked a little bit about the carrot and the stick. We should consider some nice carrots, because the technology will tell the true story. And, I see it many times where drivers are consistently the superstars in the organization. They could become your ambassadors if you reward them accordingly. There's all kinds of things you can do from a performance perspective. You don't have to empty the bank account. Little things like gas cards or cash rewards. Give them a VIP parking spot at your lot, tickets for some special events, maybe company clothing, individual luncheons, some paid time off, some movie passes. It's just, there's a whole exhaustive list that you can talk about. Next thing I want to talk about is staff training. This one is key here. You want to train all staff. The most progressive companies that have had the easiest transition did it through training. Training is vital from the driver's perspective so that they're comfortable with the devices. You know, if DOT believes even for a minute that a driver has not been properly trained, that can and will result in citations. You see that happens at Roadside. If a driver doesn't understand the technology, it's going to show up quite quickly. You know, you're partnering with an ELD vendor. You should leverage the collateral from the ELD vendor. Now, at Fleet Complete, we offer a very comprehensive suite of training. We have all kinds of collateral. You can make this material openly available. It's available online, in person. It can be downloaded. There's all kinds of things you can do. Next real key one is, leveraging all kinds of useful FMCSA links. They have a whole host of information that you can use at your disposal. You want them to understand what is the required supporting documents. And these are really what I call time markers. These are time markers that are used by the DOT, and it's what puts a driver in a certain location at a certain time. Things like their bills of lading, their itineraries, their schedules, dispatch records, trip records, expense receipts, fleet management systems, payroll records, anything with a date stamp. You should really get in front of your drivers and explain to them that this is what's going to exonerate them or cause them problems. So they need to understand that. Key thing, you need to really train your drivers how to operate the ELDs. If you have drivers using your technology, they need to know how to easily and smoothly log in. They need to really, at Roadside, explain to the officer. That goes a long way. If your driver stopped and they can very clearly explain how the device functions, how the data gets transferred through the ERODs, how malfunctions are managed. So it all comes through with training. So I would go ask your ELD vendor about that. Explaining your drivers how to comply with the regulations. This one really came out really, really high for me. When the first phase came in, I was getting all kinds of questions from drivers, motor carriers, really not having an understanding of the regulations. That's number one. That's hours of service 101, is understanding the requirements. The new management responsibilities. ELD impacts everybody in a fleet. Getting some KPIs, getting some policies regarding safety compliance, resources, getting support to your dispatchers, how to understand how these devices work, getting some KPIs that are used to measure performance, because as this gets rolled out, there's going to be some hiccups. You want to also educate your customers, your vendors, your partners. We are in a new world now. The drivers have to account for their hours. You have to have an understanding that the old world has gone. The creative movement of goods and falsification can no longer be the norm. Safety and compliance, dispatch, operations, maintenance personnel, they all have to be knowledgeable about how the technology works. If you're unsure about certain things, just reach out to me. It'd be my pleasure to answer any questions you have. Here I've got just a copy of this is the ELD card. It shows you exactly, this is something that should be in the driver's possession when stopped. Once that is there, you want to deploy your ELD. You want to pick the final date where you want to launch. You want to make sure that everyone's on site, everyone's on board. You want to keep safety top of mind, really get into, it's not just a tool to monitor drivers, it's to protect everybody, really. It'll tell a story. So if drivers are compliant, I've spoken to a lot of drivers, 1.5 years, 2 years, and even some motor carriers that have deployed the device well in advance of any regulation. These are top of mind, proactive, best in class. You try asking them to go back to the old world of paper logs and they just won't do it. So really what I'm asking you to do is, December 16th, that's the deadline. You want to make sure something is going on sideways on you. You better get it done now. Try it out now. Get some of your senior drivers, the ones who are going to be your senior people that will celebrate the technology, that will take the younger drivers under the wing and show them how the technology works. Leverage your vendor. I can't emphasize that enough. Each ELD vendor, we have here at Big Road, we have easy to use software. Our programs are very, very useful. We have 24/7, 365 days a year of support. even myself, like, you know, I'm an ELD expert, but you're running into situations, you know, reach out to me. Just go ask the expert. Send me an email. We have a team working here at Big Road Fleet Complete. Your answer will come to me, and my commitment is I will answer your answer. I will answer all your questions. But you really want to keep safety top of mind. You want to package this in a positive way. It's a new world. Like, there's resistance. You know, my dad was in the industry, and I hear others, you know, tenured employees. People don't like change, but you know, once you, it's how you package it, really. If you package it in a positive light, you will get buy-in. You will. It's just a matter of time. So I just wanted to include some useful links for you. The first one is the current US regulations for drivers. There's also the FMCSA final ELD rule. It's 564 pages long. The electronic logging device and hours of service, the FMCSA's frequently asked question and answer. There's some Big Road ELD materials there that has the link to you. I'm going to send these all off because these are all bit.ly links. And once you get them, you know, I just want to make sure they work for you. So really, in conclusion, I'm thinking, you know, it's best, don't wait to enable ELD to the last minute. You're just going to cause unwarranted anxiety for your drivers. You want to get ahead of the game. You want to bring them up to speed. Get your drivers to champion this and really, really make a difference. So, you know, I've given you a whole lot of information here. I've tried to capture this within a whole hour. I see I've got some questions here, so we're going to move to the Q&A. These are live questions, so I haven't had a chance to review any of these yet, so I'm just going to read them out at first. Number one, is a 1-ton pickup truck delivering a new boat from the manufacturer to the dealer exempt? RV towaway by pickups has been made exempt. Is this the same for boats? So really what you want to get down to is whether or not this is deemed to be a commercial motor vehicle under regulation. If you are deemed to be a commercial motor vehicle, then you would likely have to comply with the hours of service regulations. So then we'd have to look at the other exemptions. If you're within a short haul radius of 100 miles, you get back to your place of business within 12 hours, then you take 10 hours off, you would again be exempt, but you still need to comply with the hours of service regulation. Now, the other one is towaway. The towaway haul away is essentially what it is. If the goods you're carrying is what's being transported, that affords you an exemption as well. Can the ELD be removed from a truck if sold and used on another? Yes, you can do that, because the ELD, you just have to reassign it to the next vehicle, and then you have to just recalibrate it with the odometer readings, and it'll get you going. But you'll want to talk to our tech support office to make sure that you can do that. What is recorded on the log if the driver signs out of the Big Road and removes the ELD device? Well, if the driver signs out of the Big Road device and we're operating under ELD, it's going to be unassigned driving, plain and simple. Now, the part two of that question, if you remove the device, well, of course, you've lost connectivity now. So it goes back to the term that it's not integrally synchronized. So you know what happens there is nothing is recorded. So when nothing's recorded, what you want to default to is if you as a motor carrier are being looked upon for an audit. So if the auditor, DOT on road, can place your vehicle on the road performing active duty and you have no time assigned to that, then that would be what I call an egregious violation that could result in significant penalties. So at this point, I have no more questions. I'm just going to do another quick look here. I don't see any more questions now. So again, I just want to thank you very much for taking your time today. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. It doesn't have to be about ELD. You go on the Big Road or Fleet Complete site. I have a button dedicated to me. It's called Ask the Expert. You just click on that button. You can ask anything if it involves a truck or a vehicle or a driver. Feel free to ask the question. I will answer it. I tend to get a flurry of Ask the Experts after such webinars, but I do commit that I will get back to you. So thank you so much for your time, and let's keep these wheels rolling, and let's please be safe and get your drivers home safely at the end of the day. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.